2nd, 1944, the 339th took off for its assigned area near Arnhem. I was the tail end Charlie. We were patrolling the area near Arnhem for about 2 or 3 hours, 3 hours I guess. And every turn, while I started to turn, rolled out, and to see what was behind us. After about 3 hours of that, I got lazy, and I just pulled the seat up as high as it could go, and stopped rolling out. After about the third time after I stopped rolling out, all of a sudden it sounded like a shower, heavy shower in the plane, and I looked up and there was little chips out of the canopy, and I pushed the button and it let the seat down. About the time it got down, I felt I may have heard a thump, I don't know, but anyway, the plane shook all over, and I had a little bit problem in manipulating it. So, but I looked back and I could see about a dozen German planes behind me, and a couple more coming out of the clouds above us. There was, about that time, here come one, he must have been the one that shot me. Alongside me, only he was going much faster, and about like my wingman, but he had to pull way ahead, and so I pushed the throttle forward and the propeller and opened it up so I could gain some speed, and at the same time as that, I put it to the radio that there was a brake left. So I didn't know whether, I hadn't heard anything, I didn't know whether it got through or not. But anyway, I looked back and there was this blue flame above something or other, and I thought it was an electrical short, and the flame there. But when I started to turn, the German turned ahead of me, and so I could, in a so that I could cut inside of it. I gave him a burst of machine guns, but I had very little hope of hitting him, because I didn't lead him enough, and he was too far away by that time. So I looked back and that flame was still going, so I decided, well, I might be able to blow it out. And so I started into a dive, and I dove maybe a couple thousand feet. And the only result was the flame didn't blow out, but the burning gasoline came up into the cockpit. I pulled up, and I thought, well, now's the time to leave it. And so I tried to crank the canopy back about 4 or 5 times, but it wouldn't stay in the jack or whatever the heck. And I sat back down and I thought, boy, this is it. I've had it. Then I remembered the emergency release, and I reached down through the flames and pulled the emergency release, and it worked perfectly. The canopy blew off, and I started to climb out, or tried to climb out, to jump. And the only thing was, I had forgotten to unfasten my safety belt. So I had to sit back down, well, more or less steadied myself, and unbuckled the safety belt. Then I jumped. That was the only thing I did, and I jumped out, and I thought that I scraped a little of the plane with my fingernails, but nothing came of it. I missed all the tail surfaces, and I remembered somebody had said backpacks were just as good as the seat packs, but that you had to pull the cord, the rip cord, full out. So I grabbed a hold of it and I pulled it at arm's length. And although can't remember whether there was a tug or not, but it wasn't much. And but it opened, and I looked up at the parachute and to see if there was smoke or burning panels in it, because I had seen so many of the bombers that were blown up that the parachutes came out, and generally there'd be a small smoke go up, and then pretty soon 1 or 2 or 3 panels would burn out, and the chute would collapse, and I thought to myself, what a horrible way to go. But anyway, my parachute was all right. But then I looked down, and my dinghy was still on me, down below me on a strap, and I don't know how I got that off or anything, but I did. I got rid of it, so I got rid of all the fire, and then I went and looked to see where it was, and I was over some tall evergreens. Or they looked tall, and they must have been 60 feet tall anyway. But right next to them was a vacant, a weed field that had been used for crops at one time or other. And I thought, and I started to try to guide the parachute over to the weed field, but I must have pulled too hard because the parachute almost collapsed on me. And I thought, uh-oh, that's enough of that. And I'll take the trees. So I started down, and I was very low by then, and trees I hit, and I must have hit right at the edge between the field and the trees, because the next thing I knew, I was on the ground with about my back against a big evergreen. And I sat there for just a second, and I thought, boy, I better get out of here. And so I got up, and it bothered my one ankle a little bit. I had sprained the left ankle, I guess. And I got up, and I started to unbuckle my parachute, and I heard hello, and I thought, boy, I'm in luck. I've in Allied hands. And then I looked up, while I was still stooped, I looked over, and here was a soldier in blue uniform of the Luftwaffe, and there's a rifle pointed at me, and he motioned for my hands up, and the muzzle looked like about 150 millimeter, And so I didn't argue with it. I put my hands up, and he came over to me and patted me down for a weapon, which I didn't have. And then I motioned that he motioned for me to go up along the trees there, and I said, pointed to the parachute buckles, and he shook his head yes, and so I unbuckled the parachute, and we were about to start, and he put his hand up in the air and pointed, and I could hear a couple rat races up there yet, but no shots. So I don't know what happened, but anyway, I remembered that I didn't hear an explosion, nor did I see a fire, and I knew there must be something or other from my burning plane. And so anyway, we walked up about a quarter of a mile, and here was a building, rather new, and as we were going by, I saw a sign, and it was, I don't know whether it was H-E-I-L or H-E-L-L, but I didn't have time to stop and look at it. And he motioned me right on into the building, and I went there, and he said something about mumbling. The only thing I could understand was that Burgermeister, and I didn't know what he'd have to do with it. So anyway, we went in, and it looked like a schoolroom because there were chairs and they were all pushed to the back and side in the corner, but they were the kind that you just sat in, and there was an arm that could be used for writing on it. It went out like a, well, we have had them here, like a fan on it, and it was solid, and you could use it for writing. Anyway, I sat down there and I waited, and finally I guess I didn't see him, but there was the Burgermeister or whoever came in, and I saw the German soldier and this guy sitting behind the desk, front desk there, like a teacher, and I looked down, my escape and evasion kit was about half showing. I had gotten, my flying suit had gotten torn some way or other, and they got the escape and evasion kit and were looking at it, and then I heard them say, there's a, and they had the pictures of me that we had taken before we took off, that they put in our escape and evasion kit for for a passport. In fact, they even mentioned passport. There were 4 of them, and after a little bit, the soldier brought the passport pictures back and stuck them in my shirt pocket. Well, I didn't want to be caught in civilian clothes, so I didn't know what to do, but I had to leave them there anyway. And about that time, here come 3 B-26s, and very low, probably less than 1,000 feet, and they were coming over, and then I heard the rattling of guns, both the anti-aircraft gun and small arms fire, and I saw that the lead plane there was fire on it or in it, and so it went on, and I never heard another thing about them, because it must have gone on, and I don't know whether it landed or crashed or what, and I thought, well, I'll have company, but it never showed up, and so I don't know whether they crashed or not. Anyway, I waited there and it seemed to be growing dark, but I didn't think it should be, but here it was my eyes closing. And it was getting, I couldn't see. It was pretty dark. And I still sat there until after a while, they come and somebody got me and put me in a car. And there was a driver and a guard. And the driver, I sat in the front seat with the driver, and the back seat was for the guard. And after I was sure there wasn't any talking between them or anything, I figured the guard was asleep, so I could reach into that pocket and drop the pictures one at a time down between the glass and what we would call the felt that is usually on our cars, but there wasn't any there, so I dropped one down, and clang, 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 like it was to me, it was like a bell ringing, and nothing happened, so I dropped next, and one at a time, and they stopped a couple of times. I guess there were gates that they had to go through to get where we were going. I don't know where we were going yet, but anyway, after it took quite a while, it must have been, a couple of hours that we drove, or an hour and a half anyway, and they stopped and got me out and took me, and it was like a medium-sized barn, only it was divided in two, and the front, they were bars in between, and there was a lot of straw in the one where they put me, and it was the detention area. And so I sat there, and it wasn't too long before I don't know whether it was the same guard or not, but anyway, he come in and he said, "Hungering," or whatever, and pointed to his belly, and yeah, I could eat. And so he cut off a slice of cheese and gave it to me, and boy, it tasted real good. And then he handed me a piece of black bread, and it was heavy and solid. And the first bite I took, I almost spit right back out. It was so sour and so heavy, and I don't know what was in it. But I didn't want to do that for alienations for the guard, or to the guard. And so I swallowed it and took another small bite, and I finally got it down. And then they took me out into the other area, and there, I don't know how many were there, but probably sounded like about a dozen or half a dozen or a dozen. And the one fellow says, "The P-lot," and I didn't pretended I didn't know, and just shrugged my shoulders. They each one, I think, asked me, "Mustang ohne Thunderbolts," and of course I pretended I didn't know what they were talking about. And so after a little bit, they put me back in the jail part, and then a little later, I don't know how much later, they came and got me again, and they laid me on this table that was there. And somebody said, "Now, I'm a doctor," and talked very, without accent in English. He said, "He's a doctor," and he said, "I'm going to open your eyes." And he said, "Tell me if you can see light." And he opened each eye, and I could see a little bit of light. And he said, "Oh, good." He said, "When you get burned like I was," he says, "just like somebody hit you in the eyes. You have black eyes." And so he didn't say too much more, and they took me back into the area where the jail was, or more or less of a jail. holding pen. And so then I waited, and the guard took me to the station. I don't know where it was. I couldn't see it. I was blind. And he put me on a train, or we got on a train, and I heard voices, both male and female, and talking and laughing at times. And so I knew I was on a passenger, a train with held passengers. Besides, it wasn't just an army train. And boy, I'm telling you, at first I had an awful time of it, because man, there were women and men both, and boy, the farts were as loud as all get out. And I thought, good night, what kind of people are these? And after I thought for a while, and after a few days, well, I knew what kind of people. They were very much the same as I was, except because when you ate that black bread, it just made gas like the devil. And so then I was, we stayed on that train, and well, we had to change trains, I guess, once, and we went on with the train, and finally got, I guess, to Frankfurt, and at the interrogation center. Before that, I don't know, we had stopped, whether it was just outside Frankfurt or in the station or what. There was a fellow there, a German, that said they took off my watch, and that, I guess, is fair game. And then I had an identification bracelet, and they took that off me. And then they started with my wedding ring. And I hollered, no, 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 mine, mine, mine. And they said, yes, they have to have that. And so I said no. And so one German got behind me to hold me, and the other German got a hold of my hand. And, well, I could have held tighter, I guess. But anyway, I thought if they were that crazy for it, let them have it. And they took off my ring, so that was all the jewelry I had. But anyway, the fellow then said, now, I put your name on, he dropped them in the envelope, I guess, and he said, I put your name on the envelope. He says, you'll get them back. And I thought, yeah, fine, I'll get them back. And so then we went on, or I don't know whether we got on, I don't think we got on another train, but we went, and they put me in where they interrogate prisoners, and the guy started let me lay there for a while. Pretty nice bed, and or cot, and then he came in, I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 hours afterwards, and he said, now, and I said name, rank, and serial number, and told him, and he says, he said, how do I know you're not a Dutch terrorist or a spy? And I jiggled the dog tags. He said, dog tags? He said, they're a dime a dozen in Paris. Anyway, we got talking, and or I didn't talk, but he got talking, and I don't know whether he was trying to loosen me up or what, but anyway, he said he had lived here in the USA, and that he actually owned a luggage shop in St. Louis. And he said, well, he's over there fighting with the Germans, or whatever he did, was, he said his mother and father were running the store, so he wasn't, as I say, it sounds kind of not too true. But I didn't say anything, and he went on talking. We had quite, or I had listening, and had quite a chat there then. And after a while, he left, and I laid there for, I suppose, another almost day, and then they come and got me and took me, I suppose, just across the road. It didn't seem too far, and there was another distribution center, I guess, but there were a lot of, they were mainly all wounded, and they stuck me, because I had burns, they stuck me in with some tank fellas that had really been burned bad. And while we were there, why, I heard a fellow talking, and I thought to myself, I know that guy. He was in my room when we started pre-flight. And sure enough, I said, Gus Mazzocco. That wasn't his exact name, but and he said, yeah, he said, I think I know you. And so then we had a little chat, and went back, and I laid on the boards again, and I don't know whether it was 1 or 2 days, something like that. Why, they got me back out and put me on a coal-fired bus, or I should say charcoal-fired bus, or something like that. Anyway, we started out, and it smelled like the devil, but it perked along till we started to get into the little higher hills. I guess they want to call them mountains. And then they stopped, and they let me out, or they got me in the hospital at Obermarsfeld, and that was a prisoner of war hospital, and it was, of course, a German in command, but it was staffed by English doctors and a few orderlies that had elected to stay there in the prison camp in order to take care of other prisoners of war. And I was there, well, all told, 16 days that I couldn't see. And then they told me to keep trying to get my eyes open. And once I did, they said, good, now try to shut them. And they said, I kept blinking. They said, that's good. They said, you have to stretch the skin, or your eyes, you'll never be able to get them shut again. And so I blinked for I don't know how many days. And then it was time for me to go down to the operating room, and where they had performed, I don't know what all they had performed, but it was for they took me down there to see if I needed a graft. And they got down there, and they talked to me and asked me to do this and that. And I blinked and everything, and they said, can you close your... Yes, I can close my eyes. And they said, well, they didn't think it was necessary that they make a graft then. And their tools were used razor blade, and I think that was about it. Anyway, they didn't have very many cloth bandages, and they'd wash them out and use them again. They had paper, and well, I started to get up, and they said, well, wait a minute. And I had I guess a carbuncle or something on my head, and they said, well, we might as well open that, so you can't let you out of here without doing something to you. So they did. They lanced the carbuncle, and so then I went back up to where my place was in the hospital. And so that was it. There was no, there was nothing. I didn't have to have a skin graft. And I was closing and opening my eyes. And about the first thing I saw when I opened my eyes was a bunch of pigeons on the roof of a shed. And that kind of took my attention because I'd raised pigeons as a boy all my life. And in fact, I was in the pigeon company before I transferred to the Air Force. And so I watched the pigeons for a couple of days then, and then they said, well, time for you now. And I very few of them, and we walked for a couple of hours, and we came to Meiningen, M-I-N, I don't know how to spell it, Meiningen. But I guess it's in the Black Forest. We got there, and the day before it had been, the station had been bombed by the U.S. and English or whatever. And so then we had to, we stayed there overnight, and then we walked into the station and got on a train, and the guards, there were about 12 to 15 of us, I think, and then there were 6 German guards, and of course they stood at attention there for just about the first 8-10 hours, and then they started to get a little tired, and they sat down, and then finally a few of them started to go to sleep. So while they were asleep, one guard had put his rifle behind me, on the seat behind me, and I slowly took his ammunition out of the gun. It was a bolt action, and I just pulled the bolt back a little bit, and of course out would pop the shell, and I'd stick that in my pocket, and the next one, till I got the gun empty. And we went on, and then we got to Erfurt on the train, and we had to get out and wait there for another train. And I was sorry, in a way, that I had taken the shells out of his gun, because while we had hardly been there at Erfurt, and here came a whole bunch of about 30 or 35, and they were political prisoners. And boy, they were in shirt sleeves, and I was cold with what I had on. Anyway, the German soldiers sent them on down, and they kept us back, and they were at the end of the dock there, and the Germans, I was hoping, or I was sorry that I had taken the shells out of the gun, because they were our protection then. Well, we got back on the train, or a train, and then the next place we went was, we came to Sagan, and that was Stalag Luft 3. And so we were marching towards the prison camp out of Sagan, and here I had those shells in my pocket, and so while we were walking there, I kept dropping one, until I got them all dropped, because I knew every time you went to a new place, they'd search you. And I got rid of all the shells on the street, and so we were in prison camp there at Sagan. I was there at Sagan from probably late October till Christmas, and it was nice. It was comparatively nice, but except that we didn't get enough to eat. and they had cut the Red Cross parcels from a half to a quarter, and then from a quarter to an eighth, and like that. So once in a while they'd come in with a bunch of kohlrabies or some such thing that we could keep the wolf away. And in fact, when they had soup, I was warned by a fellow, they said, well, just go in the corner and dark corner and eat it, because you don't see the worms that way. And there was a few guys, of course, the politicians had been there for about 5 years, I guess, and they were well versed in where and what and who and why, and they said that that the Russians we knew were coming across Poland, and they said they set a date, and if they didn't get us out of the camp, out of Sagan, Luft 3, by this date, why the Russians would sure retake us. And but that date come and left, and we were still there, and in fact about a week or 10 days afterwards, we were still there, when all of a sudden they said it was bitter cold in, well, we stayed there till after Christmas. It was bitter cold in January, and they got us all out, and we started to march, or walk, and I was one of the last ones out, and as we walked away, we could see the barracks all on fire. They had burned the camp so that the Russians didn't get it, and we walked for about 2 weeks, and finally wound up in the little town of Spremberg, which was only about 100 miles from Sagan. But I guess they had wandered us around, and of course we weren't walking too fast either. But we had plenty of guards on that march, I'll tell you. Then someplace just a little bit beyond Spremberg, why they put us on a train, and they put us on in the 40&8s. The only thing is they put about 75 of us in one of those 40&8s. In fact, they loaded them. And we tried, after a while, we tried to lay down, and we thought there would be, if we put the feet one way and then the head the other way, I don't know. Anyway, we tried to pack in ourselves like sardines, and we still couldn't all lay down at the same time. There were still about 15, 20 people that when we wound up, we still didn't have a place to lay down. So we all got back up again and rode the train like that. They didn't provide any water, so when the train would be sidetracked or stopped, we'd one or two of us would be allowed out of a car, and we'd run up to the engine and get the drippings from the steam engine and take it back for our water. And because we all carried Klim cans, and that was a pretty good sized can. And we did that till we got to we rode to Munich, and when we got Munich, whether you got shot or not, you had to get out and crap. And so first we bombed the heck out of it, and then we crapped all over it. But that was in the railroad yards. And then we were, I forget whether we were bused or walked or what, but we went to Moosburg, and that's where we were retaken by Patton and some of his men. At the last minute, now our German guards or commandant at Moosburg, they'd already known Patton was coming, and they went up the road to meet him, or him, not him. I don't know whether it was him or one of his adjutants or whatever. Anyway, they made out that they would not fight, and that when he came in, why, or his men came in, why we would be turned over and released to him. Well, that was great. We thought, boy, oh boy, we're getting out of this lucky. And but at the last minute, here come a couple truckloads of SS guys, and they actually shot one or two of the German guards to get the others to fight. And so we had a skirmish around the camp there until SS decided they had done enough, and they pulled out. And then all was quiet. And the first tank that came in, why, all you could see was the bore of the cannon, because the guys just climbed all over it, and I mean hung on and everything. Here was something they had waited for years, some of them, and they couldn't get enough. They just climbed all over it. And then after the first spree of that, why, we went back to the barracks and waited until see what was come next. And there's a fella came in, a young fella came in, and he'd been in with Patton, and he asked for me, and yes, here. And and here he had been a pupil in school of my sister-in-law. My sister-in-law had been a teacher, and he had been a pupil, and he just wanted to shoot the breeze. Well, we did that, and we waited a couple of days, and then finally we were flown out by airplanes, and we landed in Reims, France, the VE Day. And of course, we were all happy about that. Some of the people that had been in longer than I had they looked at that white bread and they thought it was cake, because they hadn't seen anything that white in 5 years, we'll say. And so they had under tents, they had the mess hall open, and they had all the chicken you could eat and all the bread and I don't know what all. But so we finally got our fill at that time, and we're ready to head home. Anyway, we had to wait Camp Lucky Strike for a boat and maybe get a convoy together. I guess we actually was about one of the last convoys that during that from across Atlantic during the war, and we got back to the U.S. around the 1st of May. I don't know exactly what date it was, and then we had to wait there for I don't know what all, and then they took us to camp, or took me anyway, and several more, to Camp Atterbury, Indiana. And from there, they gave us a little pep talk and about insurance and stuff, and then they turned us loose with the tickets for on the bus, and rode the bus back to home, Cleveland, and then home. I lived in Niles, Ohio, and I got in there at about midnight or after, and I hadn't heard a word from my wife or anyone else all that time. And I walked up, and I didn't know whether they were still lived there or not, and I walked up and knocked on the door, and I heard ka-lump, 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 and my wife came down the stairs, and she almost knocked me over because she was so glad to see me. So we were home, and that just about ended it. The end. Incidentally, about six weeks after I was home, here came an envelope, and with my ring, my wedding ring, and identification bracelet in it. So I did get them back. In the meantime, my wife had bought another one, and so I had two. I wore two wedding rings for a long, long time, and I was happy to have them.